Hello everyone and welcome back to the Belgian Beer Brothers channel. Welcome to this second brewery breakdown. So today we're gonna talk about a brewery and not necessarily tasting their beer. I know I'm getting used to it myself. But this might be quite a long one because we are gonna talk about the brewery that has a history well over a century. We are gonna talk about Brewery Van Honsebrouck or Kasteelbrouwerij, the Kasteelbrouwerij. I have here a commemorative glass which should be washed actually. This is an anniversary glass for the 100th anniversary, 1900 to 2000 here. And even though they state that they started in 1900, the history of this brewery goes a bit further back. Actually, this history starts in 1811 when, again, the mayor of Werken, which is quite funny because Werken is the name of a place, but it also is the verb to work in Dutch or in Flemish. So the mayor of Werken, Amandus van Honsebrouck, has a dairy farm with a brewery and a distillery. He was a busy bee, he was mayor, politician, brewer, distiller, farmer. Back in the days, that was not outrageous. And he mainly brewed low fermented beers. Now, all goes well, but in 1865, Amandus dies. Luckily, he has 10 children, of whom Emile succeeds him, and Emile takes over the farm and the brewery. But because Emile's wife, Louise de Porter, doesn't get on with her mother-in-law, several years later, Emile and Louisa move to Ingelmunster, which is a bit further on in West Flanders. We are talking 1900 right now, so years and years later. Louisa's birthplace was Ingelmunster, so they moved back to her birthplace and they buy their own modest farm and start another brewery called Brewery St. Jozef or St. Joseph. Now in 1922, Emile is nearly 80 years old and Louisa has a household with 5 children to manage. So she left the brewery to their sons Paul and Ernest. A few years later, in 1930, a new 4-story building is erected with an own in-house maltery with huge storage facilities with 15 fooders, so large wooden barrels of 180 to 250 hectoliters, each to age their new brown beer in. So Paul and Ernest are living it up and really renewing the brewery, and they have all these crazy ideas. In 1939, a new brewing hall and bottling plant are added. Funny story, back in those days, payments were, let's say, creative, and they actually managed to pay half of the building works, the construction works, in money and half in beer to the contractor. Something tells me that the government and taxes weren't very happy about that. But back in those days, that was just a possibility. Now in 1945, so just post World War II, Paul and Ernest go back to brewing pilsners and export beers. Those proved quite popular during the war, but unfortunately this change cost a lot more than it actually fetched. So in 1953, Paul becomes very ill and Ernest doesn't have any children, so one of Paul's 7 children, in this case Luc, takes over, and honestly Luc was the right choice because he actually studied brewing in Wuppertal in Germany, and he interned in Wickler Kupperbrouwerij, a large German brewery back then. In 1956, so only 3 years after that, he notices that the competition in Pilsners and export beers is so extreme, so he discontinues all low fermented beers. And he decides to go all in with their new aged brown beer, for which they added the foeders to the building. This beer was Bacchus and is still in existence today. They still brew this. A year later, in 1957, he has a bold plan. Gueuze is very popular, and Luc actually thinks about brewing Gueuze himself. Now, they are about 100 kilometers or 60 miles from the Zennevalais, the Zen Valley, where most Gueuze or Lambic is brewed. And we all know that Lambic and Gueuze by default are brewed with spontaneous fermentation with the microbiology that is in the air in the Zen Valley. But they're 100 kilometers away from that valley, so they don't have that microbiology. They don't have those microbes and such. So what he does, he buys wort from the Van Halen Frères, the brothers Van Halen actually, and he propagates it in the Bacchus foeders, so in his own oak barrels. He propagates his own biology from the wort that he bought from the Van Halen brothers. He actually succeeded. And when he had enough to produce the Saint Louis Gueuze and Kriek in 1958, he actually went all in with that. So actually those are still in existence today as well. And they also have the only Gueuze that is brewed outside the Zen Valley. But I'm sidetracking here. Now in 1971, the yeast cultures created their habitat in Ingelmünster. So after about 15 years, Luc didn't have to buy any more wort from the Van Halen brothers or other Gueuze breweries. So he could brew his own Gueuze in-house, which is crazy as hell. So 100 kilometers from their natural habitat, the yeast and the biology actually created a new habitat, and they took 15 years, but they are sustainable now. That means that the brewing of Saint Louis becomes entirely local. Now, in 1978, Van Honsebrouck had expanded quite a bit, and they actually became the second largest Gueuze brewer in Belgium. And they decide to take on Bellevue by offering Gueuze on tap. They actually take this a step further, because Bellevue, with Constant van de Stok, they sponsored a Premier League football or soccer team, and Van Honsebrouck does the same. So Van de Stok from Brussels sponsored Anderlecht, and Luc Van Honsebrouck from West Flanders sponsored Bruges. And people actually call this the Gueuze War, but apparently it did pay off. Now I will link a video to the Bellevue story somewhere here. Fast forward another 10-12 years, 1990, the Brussels Gueuze brewers call for a royal decree, which is quite drastic, that states that Gueuze and Lambic may only be brewed within 20 kilometers or about 13 miles from Brussels. So you have to be in or near the Zennevalais to brew official Gueuze, which is of course a bummer for Van Honsebrouck, but they never stopped brewing. And in 1991, since the Ingelmünster Castle is still owned by the Van Honsebrouck family, they started brewing a new range of beers called Kasteelbier. So we are 91 years into this brewery and 179 years into the history of this brewing family, and only now in 1991 we have Kasteelbier, named after the castle of Ingelmünster that is owned by this family. Originally, they started out with a dark beer. I think it was 12 or 14% ABV, like a real heavy shit, but oh so good. But nonetheless, they start this new range with that dark one, and like I said, they keep innovating. So in 2001, 10 years later, Saint Louis premium lambic based fruit beers are launched, and those are still in existence right now. So the Saint Louis Creek, and I think they have a peach beer as well, and several others, and they are great sellers. Now a few years later, as if they didn't have enough fruit beers, they discovered the market of strong fruit beers, but of course they don't want to sell a strong fruit beer lambic based, and they don't want to market this under the Saint Louis name. So in 2007 they developed a strong fruit beer called Kasteel Rouge, or Castel Rouge, or Red Castle, whatever you want to call it. This is actually, originally it was based on the Kasteelbier Dark, which was watered down and macerated with cherries. Later on, Kasteel Rouge evolved to a medium basic beer, which is macerated with red fruits, not only cherries. And it is actually a great seller. Also quite a good beer. It's I believe it was 9.5% ABV, not quite sure about that. But another hit in a whole line of hits for Van Honsebrouck. 2 years later, in 2009, Xavier, the 5th generation Van Honsebrouck, follows his father, and he starts experimenting with forced aging of beers. And forced aging means you don't have to age your beer like 24 months, but because of certain processes that you inflict on your beer, it actually ages quicker. And I don't know if any one of you saw Moonshiners on National Geographic, for example, but there is one of those guys that instead of aging his whiskey on wooden barrels, he actually ages it with wood chips, which means that the surface area is way larger and his whiskey takes up a lot more aroma and it goes a lot quicker. And this is quite comparable to what Xavier did with their new beer. So he developed Cuvée du Château, and well, Cuvée we know from wine and from champagne or spumante. Cuvée is a mix of beers, and Château, French for castle. This was a oak-aged version of Kasteelbier. Again, great hit, and yeah, these guys really know what they're doing, because one of the best things I ever had came from them. So in 2013 to 16, they had a period of experimenting. They launched an IPA, several celebratory beers. They launched the Trignac, which is honestly one of the best beers I ever tasted. Unfortunately, very limited numbered bottles. Sidetracking here again, the Trignac is a triple matured in cognac barrels. Awesome combination, really. Oh, my mouth's still watering when I think of it. Anywho, they also launched the Filou in that period, and the Barista Chocolate Quad, which was one of the first chocolate beers that was actually drinkable, and is actually sold commercially and isn't doing very bad. In 2016, the Ingelmünster Brewery closes its doors and they open a new huge facility with a visitor center and a restaurant and a gift shop and all those things. Like, if you can imagine it, they have it. It was like Van Honsebrouck became the Willy Wonka of beer. And this became the most modern brewery in Europe, and actually until today it still is. It took 2 years to build and it cost about 40 million euros. And they had a capacity, starting capacity of 200,000 hectoliters a year. But I'm quite sure they have already expanded. It is almost fully automatic, and they have a brew hall that is, practically automatic, and they only require 3 people operating it. So, yeah, fantastic facility for this capacity. Wow, I've had the joy of visiting the brewery, and as a brewer, wow, hats off. They called it the Beer Kastel or a Bierkasteel, or the Kasteelbrouwerij, Kasteelbrouwerij, of course named after their #1 seller, Kasteelbier. Actually, most people even know this brewery from Kasteelbier, even though it's only 30 years old. So they have a 120-year history, and only the last quarter they got really, really well known with the larger public. In 2020, eventually, the Nitro range is introduced. And this actually followed them opening a USA division. They have a Kasteelbrouwerij or a Van Honsebrouck division in Michigan. And there they started experimenting with adding a shot of nitrogen in their beer. Sort of like Guinness. They don't replace the carbon dioxide with nitrogen because, of course, the fermentation process still produces carbon dioxide, and we still want carbon dioxide, but they inject a shot of nitrogen in their beer, and nitrogen is a lot finer, a lot thinner, a lot lighter, and has several effects on the beer. In 2021, 30 years of Kasteelbier is celebrated, and they rebrand everything. It's still Kasteelbier, but they actually redesign the labels and the bottles and everything. Like I said, this is an old glass. These days, it's not that old-fashioned anymore. And today we are 2023. They still expanded. They have a lovely facility. If you get the chance, go visit it. And they have a whole range of glasses, not like Duvel, which is collectible, but they have a range of glasses, range of beers. And next to their own beers, they also brew label beers. For example, for Aldi. Aldi has a fantastic fruit beer, the Vieux Bruxelles Kriek cherry beer, lambic based, and it is brewed by Van Honsebrouck because they are the only non-Brussels lambic brewers. What do you know? Anywho, this is where this story ends. Well, I hope it doesn't end for them. But yeah, what else can I tell you? Not that much. So the next step is discovering their beers, and that will be the next video. We will be talking about one of those Nitro beers by Van Honsebrouck. If you guys like this video, this more in-depth video about the brewery, let me know, hit the thumbs up, leave a comment, give me some tips, whatever you want. If you have any questions, leave them behind. I will be, I'll make sure to handle it. If you want to see more like this or more brew reviews or anything else, again, let me know. And if you want to see the rest of the videos that I record, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and you will get notified whenever I upload anything. See you guys in the next video, where we will be tasting the Nitro Porter by Van Honsebrouck. Cheers, guys.